The mine entrance was just a dark gash in the hillside, its weathered timbers grey and smooth after 20 years of wind and rain. Caleb Whitlock stood before it, hands on his hips, watching the last of the afternoon light fade. The smell of stone and deep damp earth drifted out from the darkness. Every breath of the November air was a sharp sting in his lungs. His wife, Eleanor, circled the entrance with the careful precision she applied to everything. Her gloved hands inspected each support beam, pushing against wood that had held strong even after 2 decades of neglect. The crunch of her boots on the loose scree echoed faintly from within the mine's mouth. "It's sound," she called out, her voice clear and confident. Caleb pulled the deed from his coat pocket. It was a single sheet of paper that represented nearly everything they had: 3 years of back-breaking ranch work, nursing livestock through droughts and blizzards, all while saving every spare dollar. When they'd made the offer, the widow Hendricks had stared at them, her eyes wide with disbelief, as if they were completely mad. An old silver mine, its veins long since played out, 3 miles from the nearest town of Prospect Creek. But when they first saw it 2 weeks ago, Caleb had recognized a look in Eleanor's eyes. It was the same determined glint she got when solving a problem with a difficult horse, or figuring out how to stretch their supplies through lean months. "Tell me again," he said softly as she came to stand beside him. Her breath formed white clouds in the cold air. She was 32, slim and strong, her face tanned and freckled from years of working outdoors. "The temperature 30 feet in is the same in summer as it is in winter," she explained, her dark hair tucked neatly under a wool cap. "I read about it in a mining journal. The earth insulates it, holding a steady temperature of about 50 degrees year-round. 50 degrees is cold for living," Caleb noted. "It's perfect for storage," she countered. "We'll build our living quarters near the entrance, where we can heat them. But deeper in," she gestured towards the darkness, "we hollow out proper storage chambers. It's a natural cold box, one that never freezes and never spoils. No ice to cut in the winter, no root cellars that flood or collapse." Caleb looked at his wife with the quiet respect that had defined their 8 years of marriage. Where others saw a useless hole in the ground, Eleanor saw an opportunity. "The neighbors will think we've lost our minds," he said, a hint of a smile on his face. "Let them think," Eleanor replied, taking his arm. "We have 6 weeks until the real cold sets in. That's enough time to make it work." The next morning, they began. Their wagon was loaded with tools, timber, and supplies from the boarding house they'd been staying at. Having worked in the Nevada mines, Caleb knew what to look for. He moved cautiously into the entrance tunnel, lamp held high, checking for bad air and loose rock. The main shaft ran 120 feet straight into the mountain, before splitting off into smaller, exhausted tunnels. The support timbers were cedar, an expensive choice, but they remained solid and strong. Water seepage was minimal, just a slight dampness on the rock walls, which told Caleb there was good drainage somewhere deeper in the mountain. About 40 feet in, the cave widened into what had once been a staging area. "We'll build the living quarters here," Eleanor decided, her voice echoing in the chamber, close enough to the entrance for light and air, but deep enough to benefit from the earth's insulation. The space was about 15 feet wide and 20 feet deep, with a comfortable 8-foot ceiling. The granite walls were scarred with the marks of picks and drills, but they were solid. "And the storage," she continued, 70 feet back, where the tunnel splits. "We can carve out sections on both sides. The temperature there will be constant." They worked for the first week with the focused intensity of people racing against the coming winter. Caleb framed a proper door at the mine entrance, using sturdy pine and tough leather hinges. Eleanor, meanwhile, used salvaged lumber from an old mining office to build interior walls for their living space, creating a room within the tunnel that could be heated efficiently. On the 5th day, the first snow began to fall, small, delicate flakes that melted as soon as they touched the ground. They were inside when it started. Caleb was fitting together a small cook stove, and Eleanor was mixing mortar for a stone hearth. "We'll need to go to town soon," Eleanor said. Let folks know what we're doing before the rumors get too wild. Caleb grinned. Too late for that. I ran into Jacobson at the lumber yard. He asked if we were planning to hibernate like bears. Eleanor laughed. What did you tell him? That it was warmer than his drafty barn of a house. By the end of the second week, their living quarters were established. The walls were up. The floor was leveled with planks laid over gravel, and the cook stove was installed, venting through a newly drilled shaft to the surface. A simple bed frame, a table, 2 chairs, and shelves for their belongings made the space, 40 feet underground, feel surprisingly cozy. But the real work was happening deeper inside. Caleb spent his days with a pickaxe and shovel, carefully expanding to side chambers off the main tunnel. Eleanor was right there with him, helping haul out rock, building shelving systems from pine boards, and devising a simple ventilation system to keep the air moving without letting in the colder surface air. They were in the middle of this work when they heard voices at the entrance. Caleb set down his tools and walked toward the light, seeing 3 figures silhouetted in the doorway. It was Lars, Jacobson, Henry Chen from the general store, and old Peter Morrison, who ran the town's hotel. Caleb, Jacobson called out, his tone a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Heard you two were living in here. We had to come see for ourselves. Come on in, Eleanor called from deeper in the tunnel. Mind your heads and watch your step. Caleb led the men into their living area. Their expressions shifted from skepticism to outright amazement as they took in the tidy room, warm from the stove and brightly lit by oil lamps. It looked more like a cozy cabin than a cave. Well, I'll be, Morrison muttered, shaking his head. You've actually made it livable. Eleanor emerged from the back tunnel, a smudge of rock dust on her cheek. It's more than livable, she said. Caleb, show them the storage rooms. They walked deeper into the mine, their lamps casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. Caleb gestured to the 2 new side chambers, each about 12 feet square, with smooth floors and shelves lining the walls. Feel the air, Caleb said. Henry Chen frowned for a moment, then his eyes widened in realization. It's calmer back here than it is outside, but cooler than your living space. About 50 degrees year-round, Eleanor confirmed. It's the Earth's insulation, cold enough to keep food fresh, warm enough that nothing freezes, and it's dry. She ran a hand along one of the clean wooden shelves. No dampness like you get in a root cellar. Jacobson was quiet for a moment, the gears turning in his head. That's actually brilliant, he finally said. It's insane, Morrison added, but there was a newfound respect in his voice. Brilliantly insane. After the men left, Eleanor turned to Caleb with a wry smile. Well, that went better than I expected. The word will spread now, Caleb said. Let's make sure we're ready to prove it works. December arrived with a vengeance. The temperature plummeted to 10 below zero, then 20 below. Snow piled up in deep drifts against the hillside, but inside the mine, life went on with surprising ease. Their living quarters remained warm with minimal firewood. The earth behind the walls acted like a massive thermal battery, holding and radiating the stove's heat. The small iron stove burned low and steady, using less than a third of the fuel they would have needed in a normal cabin. But the true triumph was the storage chambers. Eleanor had filled the shelves with everything they had preserved from the fall: root vegetables, dried beans, smoked meats, jars of preserved fruit, wheels of cheese, and barrels of flour and cornmeal. The constant 50-degree temperature kept everything perfectly. It wasn't cold enough to freeze delicate produce, but it wasn't warm enough to allow for spaghetti. They tested it constantly. Apples stayed crisp for weeks. Potatoes didn't sprout. Carrots remained firm and sweet. The smoked hams and bacon aged beautifully in the dry, still air. A young couple, Eleanor and Caleb, have recently bought an old, abandoned mine. To their amazement, they discover it has a secret superpower. Deep inside, the temperature is a constant, perfect 48 degrees. Their butter, stored in crocks, stays fresh for weeks. Their vegetables never freeze or rot. It's the perfect natural refrigerator. One snowy evening, there's a knock at their door. It's their neighbor, Henry Chen. His root cellar, dug in wet soil, has frozen solid. Everything is ruined. He's devastated. Without a second thought, Eleanor and Caleb offer him space in their mine. Bring it tomorrow, Caleb says. We'll make room. Eleanor knew this was just the beginning. The winter was only getting colder, and she was right. Soon, more neighbors arrived. The Hendersons' potato cellar collapsed under the weight of snow. The Morrisons' dried goods rotted after their storage shed roof broke. The Chens' butter and cheese went bad trying to keep them from freezing in their warm kitchen. For every family in need, Caleb and Eleanor made a place for their precious supplies. They added shelves, organized everything, and kept detailed records. The mine was no longer just their personal pantry. It was becoming a lifeline for the community. Caleb suggested they should charge a little something for the space and the work. But Eleanor had a different idea, one that was truer to the spirit of the frontier. No money would change hands. Instead, they would trade. The Hendersons could offer hay for future horses. The Morrisons could provide credit at their hotel. Mr. Chen could give them a discount at his store. Everyone helps everyone. It was the frontier way, a network of mutual support with the mine at its very center. By mid-January, the weather turned from harsh to absolutely brutal. Temperatures plummeted to 30 below zero. Snowdrifts buried fences and threatened livestock. People were struggling. Firewood was scarce, supplies were low, and keeping food from either freezing or spoiling was becoming a life-or-death problem. The town organized a meeting at the Morrisons' hotel. The mayor, a weathered rancher named Augustus Polk, laid out the grim reality. Even when we have food, he said, we can't store it. It either freezes solid, or we keep it warm and it spoils. Then, a voice from the crowd called out, "What about Whitmore's mine?" Suddenly, all eyes were on Caleb and Eleanor. Eleanor stood up. "We've already stored for several families," she announced. "It's working well. The temperature stays steady. Nothing freezes. Nothing spoils." The mayor asked the critical question, "How much room do you have?" Caleb joined his wife. He explained that their current setup could hold what they had, plus maybe twice as much. But there were 3 more unexplored tunnels. He did a quick mental calculation. "If we expand them," he said, "reinforce them, build shelving, I believe it could store enough goods for the entire town." The room buzzed with talk. Some were hopeful, others skeptical. "It's a mine," one man scoffed. "Mines collapse. You want us to risk our survival on that?" Caleb calmly explained the stability of the old cedar supports and the solid granite, but the doubt lingered. Then Eleanor spoke, her voice cutting through the noise. "People are losing food right now," she said simply. "Food they cannot afford to lose. We have a solution that works, and if people are willing to help, we can expand it in a week." The mayor looked around the room. He called for a vote. Who was in favor of a work party to expand the mine? Hands went up, first hesitantly, then with more confidence. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. 3 days later, on a bitterly cold morning, 15 men and women showed up at the mine, armed with tools and determination. Caleb organized them into teams: diggers, woodworkers, and builders. The mine, once a silent relic, came alive with the sounds of hammers, saws, and shared purpose. Eleanor, with her meticulously drawn plans, directed the entire operation. She moved between groups, solving problems and ensuring everything was built to last. One of the women, Martha Jacobson, watched her in admiration. "You've got a real head for this," she said. Eleanor just smiled. Running a household is just engineering on a small scale. The work progressed faster than anyone imagined. By the end of the week, the mine had been transformed into a massive, well-organized cold storage facility, large enough to feed 200 people through the winter. They established a system. Each family had their own designated space. Eleanor kept a detailed log of everything that went in and out. In return for the storage, families contributed to the mine's upkeep: firewood, lamp oil, and labor for repairs. It wasn't a bank for money, as Henry Chen suggested. It was a commonwealth for food. Everyone contributed, and everyone benefited. The real test came in late January. A monster storm system parked itself over the region and refused to budge. For 12 straight days, snow fell relentlessly. The temperature dropped to an unbelievable 40 below zero. The wind howled like a furious beast, piling snow into 15-foot drifts and turning the main street into a white canyon. People were trapped in their homes, burning through firewood, rationing what little food they had left. Home storage failed completely. But down in the mine, life continued with a surprising sense of normalcy. Caleb kept the path to the entrance clear. Eleanor managed the inventory, allowing families to safely retrieve their supplies. The constant, perfect temperature of the mine protected the community's food supply. Fresh vegetables stayed crisp. Preserved meats remained safe. The mine had become their salvation. One evening, as the blizzard raged outside, Caleb and Eleanor stood at the mine entrance. "You know what I just realized?" Eleanor said, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. "We could live here, not just for the winter, but year-round." She gestured back toward their living quarters. "It's safe, it's comfortable. The temperature is always perfect. This could be a real home." Caleb chuckled. "The neighbors would definitely think we're crazy." "The neighbors already think we're crazy," Eleanor replied with a laugh. "Might as well be comfortably crazy." After the brutal winter, damage estimates began. The Hendersons' barn had caved in, and 3 families had lost their roofs. The general store's storage shed was a complete loss, but the human cost was minimal, mainly because no one had starved. The old mine's storage had kept the entire town fed through the worst of it. At the next town meeting in late February, Mayor Polk stood before the assembly with an unusual solemnity. "I want to thank Caleb and Eleanor Whitmore," he said. "When they bought that played-out mine, I'll be honest, I thought they were wasting their money on a hole in the ground. But they saw something we didn't, and their ingenuity and kindness likely saved lives this winter." Applause filled the room. Caleb and Eleanor sat together, hands joined, both a little embarrassed by the attention. "I'd like to propose," the mayor continued, "that we formalize the agreement and make the mine a permanent community resource. The Whitmores will keep ownership, of course, but we'd establish it as the town's official cold storage facility. In turn, we'd pay them a modest fee, either in cash or trade, and guarantee them help with upkeep and expansion." The vote was unanimous. Spring came slowly to the Colorado mountains, unwilling and tentative. Snow melted in grudging increments, revealing brown earth and dead grass. The ground thawed from the top down, causing a brief, messy season of mud that made every trip an ordeal. But life returned. Birds started singing, water trickled down the hillside, and the sharp, green smell of new growth filled the air. Caleb and Eleanor began planning their own growth, with the same careful attention to detail. They planned additional living quarters, a proper kitchen with counter space, a sitting room for guests, and eventually, a guest room for family visits they hoped would come. They brought in an experienced well digger who showed them how to follow water veins in the rock, and they struck clean, sweet, cold water 60 feet deep inside one of the tunnels. They installed better ventilation, using principles Eleanor had learned from mining journals, bringing in fresh air through carefully positioned shafts, while maintaining the perfect temperature in the storage areas. Each improvement was tried, measured, and adjusted. Nothing was left to chance. Henry Chen, the store owner, stopped by one April morning, finding them digging a new room. "I brought the ledger for the first quarter," he said, handing Eleanor a leather-bound book. "Thought you'd want to see the numbers." Eleanor flipped through the pages, seeing the records of deposits and withdrawals, families contributing and getting what they needed. At the back, Henry had estimated the total value of food preserved versus what would have been lost. "According to my estimates," Henry said, "the mine saved about $8,000 in food loss this winter. That's probably a quarter of the town's yearly food budget." Caleb whistled low. "That's significant. It's revolutionary," Henry corrected him. "Do you understand what you've accomplished here? It isn't just storage. It provides food, security, stability, protection against extreme weather. Other towns will hear about this. They're going to want to replicate it. After Henry left, Eleanor looked at Caleb thoughtfully. We could do that, you know. Advise other mining towns on how to convert their abandoned mines. There are hundreds of played-out shafts across Colorado. Most could be adapted for this. Could be a business, Caleb agreed. Though I'd want to finish our home first. Of course, Eleanor said with a smile. The first rule of frontier life. Take care of your own base before you start building for others. By late spring, their underground home was surprisingly spacious and comfortable. They'd carved out 4 rooms in total, living quarters, a kitchen, a bedroom, and a small study where Eleanor kept records and Caleb drew engineering plans. Oil lamps and reflective surfaces made the rooms feel bright, despite being inside a mountain. The steady 50-degree temperature meant they needed minimal heating in winter and stayed naturally cool in summer. The storage chambers had grown to 6 separate rooms, each meticulously organized by food type: root vegetables, preserved meats, dried goods, dairy, canned goods, and emergency supplies. Every item had a place, every withdrawal was recorded, and every family knew exactly what they had in storage. In late May, a journalist from the Denver Post named Rebecca Stone arrived in Prospect Creek. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her early 30s, dressed in practical traveling clothes. She'd heard about the mine house from travelers and was intrigued. She spent 3 days interviewing Caleb and Eleanor, studying every corner of the mine with a notebook always in hand, and talking to the townspeople about how the storage facility had impacted their winter survival. "This is one of the most innovative things I've ever seen," she told them as she prepared to leave. "Using the Earth's natural insulation for food preservation, turning a worked-out mine into a home and a community resource. It's brilliant, and it's going to make you famous." "That's not really what we're after," Eleanor said quietly. "I know," Rebecca answered, "but sometimes recognition finds you anyway. You've solved a real problem in a new way. People need to know that's possible." The article ran in June, taking up half the Sunday issue. It was detailed and technical, but also warm and personal, focusing on the practical cleverness of 2 frontier people who'd seen possibility where others saw only a hole in the ground. Letters started pouring in. Mine owners wanted help. Towns asked for consultations. Engineers requested technical details. Caleb and Eleanor spent their evenings responding, sketching plans, and discussing the principles of thermal mass and earth insulation. "We're going to need to hire help if this keeps up," Caleb said one evening, surrounded by a mountain of mail. "Or we could train people," Eleanor offered. "Teach them the principles so they can apply them themselves." Knowledge shared is knowledge increased. By the time the next winter came around, the Whitmores had helped 3 other towns create their own mine-based storage facilities. They'd even written a detailed manual on their conversion methods. Their home had become something of a pilgrimage site for people interested in innovative frontier living. More importantly, they'd proven that abandoned resources could be repurposed, that natural systems could be harnessed efficiently, and that ingenuity and hard work could solve seemingly insurmountable problems. On Christmas Eve, they held a gathering in the expanded community room they'd dug near the mine's entrance. 30 people crowded in, families who stored their food there, neighbors who'd helped build, and friends who'd believed in their impossible idea from the start. Mayor Polk raised a glass to Caleb and Eleanor Whitmore, who bored a hole in the ground and turned it into the heart of our community. Glasses clinked and people cheered. Eleanor looked at Caleb with the same quiet happiness she'd shown that first day. "Worth every penny?" he asked. She just smiled. Later that evening, the room was still warm with laughter and the smell of food stored perfectly in the chambers beyond. Outside, the snow fell gently, but inside the mountain, in the home they'd carved from ingenuity and stubbornness, life was warm and bright. Caleb stood at the entrance. "This feels right," he mused. "We're part of the mountain, not just on top of it." Eleanor laughed. "The community thinks we're eccentric. Let them. We're warm, comfortable, and have the best food supply in 3 counties. What we appreciate in middle age." Caleb said, is what we should have cherished all along. Security, stability, and the ability to help others. They stood in peaceful silence, watching the snow fall on the valley. Behind them, the mine stretched deep into the mountain rooms carved with purpose, chambers filled with community resources, and a home built on vision and hard work. The world above had said it couldn't be done, that a mine was for extraction, not habitation. But Caleb and Eleanor had seen something different. They had seen possibility. They had seen a solution. They had seen home, and they had been right. The mountain held them softly, 50 degrees and steady, warm in the winter, cool in the summer. A shelter built, not on top of the earth, but within it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story of innovation and community, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. See you next time.